Hi, bestie. Welcome to another coloring story time. Let's get started. The policy was on page 47. Clara knew that because she had read the employee handbook 3 times in her first week. Once out of nervousness, once out of boredom, and once because she couldn't sleep. Page 47 sat somewhere in the middle, thick with sub-bullets and italicized warnings, the kind of page designed to look harmless while quietly ruining lives. Romantic or intimate relationships between employees within the same reporting structure are strictly prohibited. Strictly prohibited. She remembered rolling her eyes at it then. Alone in her studio apartment, the glow of her laptop reflecting off unpacked boxes. She didn't plan on falling in love at work. She planned on doing her job well, earning her salary, and maybe, if things went right, being promoted out of obscurity before she turned 35. That was the plan. The problem with plans, Clara would later realize, was that they assumed you knew who you were before you met the person who changed you. One Ethan Rowe was not what she expected. She had been told in advance that he was brilliant, that he was intense, that he had been fast-tracked into leadership before anyone else on his cohort had learned where the supply closet was. She expected arrogance. She expected someone polished and distant, someone who shook hands without warmth and spoke in perfectly constructed sentences that never invited interruption. Instead, she met a man hunched over a malfunctioning printer, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, muttering under his breath like he was negotiating with a hostile deity. "I swear to God," he said, slapping the side of the machine, "if you jam one more time, I will—" The printer whined. Clara froze, clutching her ID badge, suddenly unsure whether to announce herself or quietly back away. He looked up, startled, dark eyes widening slightly before softening into something apologetic. "Sorry," he said. "You must be Clara." "Yes," she replied automatically. "And you must be threatening office equipment." A corner of his mouth twitched. "Ethan. And I would never actually hurt it. We have a complicated relationship." She laughed before she could stop herself. It was a small thing, a harmless thing, the kind of moment that should have passed without consequence. Instead, something subtle shifted. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a quiet awareness like a door left ajar. 2. They worked on the same floor. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was how naturally they fell into rhythm. Ethan was methodical, where Clara was intuitive. He built systems. She navigated people. He questioned assumptions. She questioned motives. Meetings that dragged with others, sharpened when they spoke. Ideas bouncing back and forth with an ease that made their colleagues glance up from laptops, faintly irritated or impressed. "You two should just co-present," someone joked during week 3. They did. By week 6, it felt strange when they weren't paired together. Clara noticed things she didn't mean to notice. The way Ethan leaned back when he listened, as if giving ideas room to breathe. The crease between his brows when something didn't sit right with him. How he remembered details, small, human ones, like the fact that she hated black coffee or that she called her sister every Sunday without fail. Ethan noticed things too. He noticed how Clara softened difficult conversations without weakening them, how she filled silence not with noise but with purpose, how she seemed to carry herself like someone who had learned, early on, to be both careful and brave. Neither of them said anything, not because they didn't feel it, but because they both knew page 47. 3. The first almost moment happened on a Thursday, a late one. The office was quiet in the way that felt borrowed, lights dimmed, keyboards stilled, the air humming with HVAC and unspoken fatigue. Clara had been staring at a spreadsheet for too long, the numbers blurring into shapes that felt faintly accusatory. Ethan appeared at her desk with 2 mugs. "I'm declaring this a caffeine emergency," he said. "You look like someone who's been personally victimized by Excel." She accepted the mug. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. For half a second, neither of them moved. Then Clara pulled back, smiling too quickly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." The words hung there, heavier than intended. They stood in silence, the space between them suddenly loud. Ethan cleared his throat. "Anyway, don't let the cells win." He walked away. Clara watched him go, heart pounding with something dangerously close to regret. 4. They became careful. Careful with proximity, careful with eye contact, careful with humor that edged too close to intimacy. Careful in a way that required constant awareness. It was exhausting. It was also impossible to sustain. Because care, when it's built on denial, eventually fractures. The breaking point came during a project review that went wrong. A client was unhappy, voices were raised, someone implied fault where there was none. Clara, blindsided, felt the familiar burn of being underestimated coil tight in her chest. Before she could speak, Ethan did. Calm, firm, unyielding. That assessment isn't accurate, he said. And placing responsibility there ignores the documented constraints we outlined from the start. The room's still. He didn't look at her while he spoke, but Clara felt it anyway. The unmistakable sense of being seen, defended, valued. Afterward, she found him in the stairwell, hands shaking more than she wanted to admit. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he replied quietly. "I did." Their eyes met. Something crossed his face. Hesitation, longing, restraint tangled together. "This can't happen," Clara said, though the words felt like a betrayal. "I know," Ethan said. Neither of them moved. Finally, Ethan stepped back, but the distance felt temporary. 5 rumors are born in silence, not from what people say, but from what they don't. Lingering glances, conversations that pause when others approach. The subtle recalibration of space that only happens when 2 people are acutely aware of each other. Clara noticed the looks first, the knowing ones, the speculative ones. She adjusted, smiled more at others, stayed later or left earlier, avoided the elevator when Ethan was there. Ethan mirrored her restraint. It made everything worse. Because now every interaction felt deliberate, charged, like holding a breath too long. The policy on page 47 grew teeth. 6. The night everything changed wasn't dramatic. There was no storm, no confession shouted across a room, just a work dinner that went on too long, laughter fueled by shared exhaustion, colleagues peeling away one by one until Claire and Ethan found themselves standing outside the restaurant, coats on, city lights reflecting off wet pavement. "Well?" Clara said, hands tucked into her sleeves. "This is me." Ethan nodded. "Yeah." Neither of them moved. "I hate this," Clara said suddenly. Ethan exhaled. "Me too." They stood there, the unspoken finally pressing too hard to ignore. "I don't want to keep pretending this isn't happening," she said, "but I don't want to lose my job." "I don't want you to lose your job," Ethan said, "or your trust, or anything." Silence stretched, then softly. "But I don't want to lose this either." Their eyes met, and this time neither of them stepped back. The kiss was brief, careful, almost restrained, but it was enough. 7. They didn't become reckless. They became secret. Late-night messages sent and deleted. Coffee breaks staggered by minutes. Touches disguised as coincidence. Feelings folded into private moments stolen between deadlines. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. Clara had never lived a life that required this much vigilance. Ethan had never wanted something that came with this much risk. They told themselves it was temporary. They told themselves they were being responsible. They told themselves lies that sounded like hope. 8. The email came on a Monday. Subject: organizational realignment. It was innocuous, bureaucratic, the kind of message that promised clarity and delivered uncertainty. Ethan's role was shifting, so was Clara's. Different reporting lines, different projects. Page 47 loosened its grip. They sat across from each other in a conference room that afternoon, hands visible, hearts racing. "This changes things," Clara said. "It does," Ethan agreed. They smiled, relief blooming. But relief, Clara would learn, often comes with its own complications. Because now that they could, they had to decide whether they should. 9 love, when freed from constraint, reveals its weight. Without secrecy, doubts surfaced. What if work had magnified their connection? What if proximity had mistaken itself for destiny? They took it slow. Dates that felt almost formal. Conversations that ventured beyond shared stress. Moments that tested compatibility outside fluorescent lighting and deadlines. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. And honesty, Clara realized, felt better than fear. 10. They told HR, not because they had to, because they wanted to stop hiding. The conversation was professional, measured, surprisingly anticlimactic. Policies, it turned out, were written for control, not cruelty. When Clara walked back to her desk, she felt lighter. When Ethan met her eyes across the floor, he smiled openly. No caution, no calculation. Just warmth. 11 months later, on a quiet afternoon, Clara found herself flipping through the handbook again. She paused on page 47. "Read it," smiled. Policies, she realized, could warn you about risk. They couldn't protect you from love. She closed the document and stood, walking toward Ethan's office, knocking lightly before stepping inside. "Coffee?" she asked. He looked up, eyes soft. "Always." And this time when their fingers brushed, there was nothing forbidden about it at all.